hills of Corleone, Sicily, one man's name would strike fear into the hearts of anyone who heard it: Toto Riina. Known as the Beast, his reign of terror shattered lives and altered the course of history in the mafia world. His brutal rise to power within the infamous Cosa Nostra was fueled by ruthless ambition and a deep hunger for control. As the mafia's most feared boss, Riina orchestrated murders, bombings, and betrayals with cold precision, leaving a trail of blood that would haunt Italy for decades. But what truly made him the monster he became? The shocking truth of his empire is more twisted than you could ever imagine. Toto Riina's early life. Born in 1930 in the small town of Corleone, Sicily, Salvatore Toto Riina would grow up in an environment that nurtured the darkest elements of crime. From an early age, Riina was no stranger to violence. His childhood was marked by poverty, the constant shadow of mafia control, and a brutal, unforgiving society where survival often meant turning to crime. Corleone itself was already infamous for its connection to the mafia. It wasn't just a town, it was a breeding ground for mafia bosses. Toto's family lived in the heart of it all, surrounded by stories of murder, power struggles, and mafia loyalty. The young Riina would witness the crimes of his elders, and instead of recoiling in fear, he absorbed the ruthless code of silence and violence. By the time he was in his teens, he had already been drawn into the criminal underworld. But what set Riina apart from the others was his insatiable ambition. While many young men in Sicily were content with small-time operations, Riina was determined to rise to the top, no matter what it took. He believed in the philosophy that the ends justified the means. If someone stood in his way, they would have to be removed. Rise to power, the strategy of fear. By the 1950s, Riina had begun working his way up in the Cosa Nostra, the Sicilian Mafia, a criminal organization that had deep roots in Italian society. But Riina wasn't like the typical mafia members. He was cold, calculating, and far more willing to commit extreme violence than anyone else in his group. His initial rise was marked by strategic murders. Riina's methods were brutal. He would target rivals, using public displays of violence to send a message to anyone thinking of challenging him. One of his key strategies was the bombing of high-profile targets. These acts of terror weren't just about killing, they were about instilling fear, keeping the people of Sicily under control, and letting every mafia member know that crossing him would mean certain death. This fear strategy worked. Soon enough, Riina became the top figure in the Corleone mafia family. However, he wasn't content with just being a local boss. He had bigger plans. His ambition grew, and by the early 1980s, Toto Riina was not only one of the most powerful figures in Sicily, but in the entire mafia network. The Capo dei Capi, boss of all bosses. Toto Riina's ascent to the position of Capo dei Capi, or boss of all bosses, didn't come without challenges. He was known to have a ruthless streak, and his rise to the top was marked by bloody betrayals and strategic killings that removed anyone who threatened his power. His biggest rivals included powerful bosses like Giuseppe Pino Greco and Salvatore Cescitedu Lo Piccolo, both of whom were wiped out in gruesome ways. In 1981, Riina orchestrated a powerful coup within the Cosa Nostra. He took control by eliminating those who were previously in power, including Gaetano Badalamenti, who had been one of the most influential bosses in the mafia at the time. Riina didn't just want to be the most powerful figure in Sicily, he wanted to control everything. His takeover was ruthless. He used extreme violence to make sure his rule was never questioned. Under his leadership, the mafia became an unstoppable force. Riina didn't just focus on traditional mafia activities like drug smuggling and extortion. He expanded the organization's reach into international trafficking and even took control over the political and business sectors in Italy. He had corrupt politicians and businessmen on his payroll, ensuring his rule remained unchallenged. The war with the state, attacks on law enforcement. In the 1980s, Riina decided to take the mafia's war to the state itself. He didn't just want control of the streets, he wanted complete domination over the Italian government. One of the most shocking acts in his reign was the decision to target high-ranking police officers, magistrates, and judges who were investigating the mafia. In 1982, he ordered the assassination of Judge Rocco Cinici, a prominent anti-mafia magistrate. Cinici had been a thorn in the side of the mafia and had been responsible for cracking down on its operations. Riina's message was clear: no one was safe if they dared to oppose him. But Riina didn't stop there. In 1992, he orchestrated one of the most infamous bombings in Italian history. The bombs targeted Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, two of the country's most prominent anti-mafia judges. They were both killed in separate attacks, leaving Italy in shock and fear. These bombings were a turning point. Riina's vendetta against the state had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. The Second Mafia War, blood on the streets. By the early 1990s, Riina's war with the Italian state had reached new heights. The mafia was no longer just an underground force. It was now at war with the very institutions that governed Italy. Riina's grip on Sicily had grown even stronger, but his desire to control the nation only led to more violence. The Second Mafia War began as Riina fought not just against rival mafia families, but against the Italian authorities. His men carried out numerous bombings, killings, and kidnappings, terrorizing the population and making it clear that no one was safe. The brutality reached new levels as Riina's reign of terror seemed unstoppable. The fall of Toto Riina. It wasn't until 1993, after years of violence, that Riina's empire began to crumble. The mafia boss had always believed that his power was unbreakable, but cracks were beginning to show. The Italian authorities had finally begun to crack down harder on the mafia. Mass arrests were made, and Riina's men started to turn against him. On January 15, 1993, Riina's reign ended when he was arrested in a quiet neighborhood in Palermo. His arrest was the result of years of surveillance, intelligence work, and the efforts of anti-mafia forces who had slowly begun to piece together his network of corruption. The capture of Riina was seen as a massive victory in the fight against organized crime in Italy, but while Riina was arrested and convicted for his crimes, his legacy still looms large. The mafia he left behind was a dangerous, fractured version of what it once was, and his name continues to be synonymous with terror. Riina's fall didn't mark the end of mafia violence in Italy, but it did change the course of history. The mafia had always been a powerful force in Italian life, but after Riina's capture, the Italian government began a systematic effort to destroy it. Anti-mafia legislation was strengthened, and there was a renewed sense of purpose in the fight against organized crime. But the damage had been done. The wave of violence and fear that Riina's reign of terror caused would take years to heal. His criminal empire, though weakened, was still a force to be reckoned with, and his name would always be remembered as a symbol of the mafia's darkest days. Toto Riina was a man who lived by one rule: power at all costs. His reign was marked by ruthless violence, unimaginable betrayals, and a desire for absolute control. To this day, his name is synonymous with terror, and his crimes remain some of the most shocking in mafia history. While he is no longer free, the scars he left on Sicily and Italy as a whole are still evident. The mafia that Riina built continues to influence the world of organized crime, and his story serves as a chilling reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of Toto Riina, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories. Drop a comment and let us know which criminal mastermind you want us to cover next.